Okay. Welcome everyone to this podcast series, The Legal Lens, which is hosted by Legitquest. Let me quickly introduce Legitquest, the force behind this particular podcast. So at Legitquest, we are on a mission to transform how legal professionals, across different use cases, let's say, how they use legal information to, deliver justice and so forth. Now, from AI-powered legal research to fast, expert-verified due diligence that we provide as well through our tool called Level, we are helping legal professionals make smarter and faster legal decisions over here. If you are in the business of risk, compliance, or lending, this is the tech you want on yourself. Now, welcome to the fifth episode of the Legal Lens podcast. As a thought leader in the legal tech space, we have created this platform, to bring industry leaders, the decision makers, and change makers into candid conversations. And our mission over here is to help uncover honest insights, real challenges, and emerging trends that are shaping the future of the legal innovation and the industry of this country. So today we have uh, with us Savitha Kesav Jagadeesan. She's a senior partner at resident partner at Kochhar. She brings decades of experience across corporate law, intellectual property, employment law, and high-value merger transaction. Now, with her rich experience in mergers, compliance, and deal structuring, Savitha is perfectly placed to guide us through, the legal blueprint behind successful mergers, what goes on behind the scenes, what legal professionals look out for, and how the law firms help protect deal value in complex transactions. So, before we dive in, Savitha, can you please walk us through a little bit through your journey and the work that you do?
Thank you so much, Nehal. And it's really great to be on this podcast with you. It's a very interesting topic that you've chosen and given to me. So I'm really looking forward to share a little bit, with whatever I have learned through the process. About me, I started my career actually in Bombay. I'm a National Law School alumnus, passed out from Bangalore. Started my career at Mullah and Mullah. From there on, so the work that I did when I was in Bombay was varied. I did court work as well as I had started working on the corporate law spectrum altogether, even at that stage. So it was quite an interesting mix to be able to do both process procedure as well as do the general corporate work that started unraveling at that time. From then on, I went to Delhi. I was working in Delhi. Same, a lot of the work that I did was more around shareholder agreements. There was also the blue chip era at that time. So a lot of the transactional work had started cropping up, and that became one of your main branches of law you dealt with. Especially, it was also the time you were seeing a lot of deals, cross-border deals coming in. So FIBP approvals was something that also I worked a fair deal on. I During the time that I was there, actually just before I started Bombay, I was also in Calcutta. I was working with a couple of companies there, and it was more on an internship basis. The reason why I bring it up is because it's so I did Calcutta, I did Bombay, I came to Delhi. From Delhi, I got the opportunity to do research in cybersecurity at the university in Melbourne called Monash University, and that was a completely different dimension. I went back to learning. I was in an international forum, but yeah, great learning experience. And then that brought me back to India, and I landed in Chennai. So that's where I am. I've been working here for the past 13 years, actually 20 years. If I don't know why I said 13, 13 with Kochhar. And the work has been very varied for me. I do a lot of corporate commercial transactions. I do a lot of intellectual property, employment law is another spectrum that I really concentrate upon, as well as technology law. It's to do with the jurisdiction that I am, because we do a lot of work with companies and we tend to advise them from end to end. So you kind of need to know most of these spectrums. So worked in all different jurisdictions, realized there are very different ways of, client development work,
Mhm.
as well as, the very core ethos when you're at a workplace. So that was a very exciting time that I got to, what do you call, experience such different
Mhm.
work cultures as well as work footies.
Perfect. Sounds great. I mean, listening to you, I think you have such a tremendous, vast experience across different skill sets that you might have acquired, different kind of challenges. So, yeah, really excited to dive deep into it. So, for our audience that's, um, doesn't know really much about like, the legal due diligence, like the nitty-gritty of it, like someone that's, hearing it for the first time, like how would you explain it in the simplest way?
So I think when I say legal due diligence, so I think anybody who's getting into the aspect of due diligence of a company, it is basically to understand the health of the company. It is mainly for you, for one to provide a perspective to whoever is going to put in their money into that company to understand what is good and what is bad about the company. It's mainly for
Mhm.
you to check on what is going wrong in the company, if anything at all, and for you to be aware before you put the money where it is. So
Mhm.
its main objective is basically to find out whether or not there are any non-compliances, are there any issues or concerns with the contracts that one is entering into, um, are the licenses, regulatory approvals essentially in place? Are there any, maybe, any red flags with the company that you think could essentially prove to be a roadblock in the future? And that basically is
Mhm.
a reason why you do the due diligence, because that is your first step in any deal structure. And that's just not mergers, it's any format of when you're purchasing, I would say. So everything
Mhm.
from merger to an acquisition is about that purchase, it's about that investment. So that leading
Mhm.
due diligence is your first step to do it, which basically, the words itself says you have to be diligent about
Mhm.
what where you are essentially putting the money in.
For sure, for sure. No, that definitely makes sense. So, can you maybe tell us a little bit about like at what particular stage of a deal flow usually, the legal professionals is step in, taking care of the legal due diligence aspect?
So ideally speaking, right at the first step. So
Mhm.
usually, the term sheet is something where sometimes the two parties tend to get together. Especially we've seen when it comes to what do you call startups. A lot of the term sheet signing gets done invariably right in the beginning. There is, a P would have essentially identified a company and said, okay, this is good, like the founders, and that's the reason why they enter into it. But some of the larger structures, the conversation starts, negotiation starts, and a basic formulation comes into place. And once they have pinpointed that, yes, financially the company is a viable option, or there is something in that company that one wants, is when,
Mhm.
the term sheet essentially starts getting visualized. And during that
Mhm.
stage, and maybe sometimes after the stage of the term sheet, is when this whole aspect of due diligence essentially comes into place. The idea is also
Mhm.
that your term sheet captures a lot of the commercial picture, and
Mhm.
thereafter, when that converts into your agreement, the legal due diligence that you have done, or the financial due diligence, technical due diligence, all those get into that legal documentation. So that is when, so I would say term sheet, or maybe a little bit before the term sheet signing.
Okay, perfect. So, when it comes to legal due diligence, I think it's a huge umbrella term. In simple words, like what all does it include in a deal structure, and which specific slice of that work falls under, the legal due diligence, whether it's contract or a litigation check, so forth.
So the main thing you have to understand, so when you talk about due diligence, like I said, it's
Mhm.
that diligence that is due towards the company. So there are different
Mhm.
brackets under which a company basically sets going. They do a legal due diligence, of course, what we are mainly talking about, but there are aspects of financial due diligence, which also is a
Mhm.
very core due diligence that the company essentially does. Apart from that, there's environmental IT, depending upon what the deal structure is all about, that also comes
Mm-hmm.
into. Legal becomes a
Mm-hmm.
very key component of it, which is
Mm-hmm.
done mainly to understand things like what are the contracts that are
Mm-hmm.
entered into by the company, who are the larger vendors or suppliers to that particular company. That's what you get to know
Mm-hmm.
from contracts. You also get to know what are the licenses, registrations that the
Mm-hmm.
company essentially has, whether or not they're compliant with those licenses, registrations. We divided them into different buckets. Again, we look at labor,
Mm-hmm.
what are the kind of aspects that they have followed as far as the employees are concerned. How is that employment contract in place? We look at aspects of vendor contracts, governmental contracts, or any formats of contracts that they have. A
Mm-hmm.
very, very important aspect that we look at is also what kind of intellectual property does that company have. Because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
your deep value is associated with just the IP of the company also. So IP is another
Mm-hmm.
thing that is looked at, or whatever a particular founder of the company or the group is essentially talking about, that they
Mm-hmm.
hold as IP is definitely looked at, verified. We
Mm-hmm.
also, to a large extent, look at litigation and dispute
Mm-hmm.
resolutions that might have been in place. So that is also a
Mm-hmm.
very core requirement for us to check to see if there are any red flags with respect to the companies, any large value disputes that they have entered into, any notices that they have received from the various governmental departments. And tax is a major red flag that one looks at. Is there
Mm-hmm.
any pending, as well as any corporate compliance that they haven't done, also are
Mm-hmm.
major red flags that tend to looked at and seeing whether or not you can earmark.
Okay. Yeah, so it actually sounds really interesting. There's like it looks like there's like multiple parts of it that goes hand in hand during the due diligence work. So maybe can you explain to our audience, what does the entire workflow look like? You mentioned IP, you mentioned the litigation checks, contracts, registration. So how does the workflow look like and how do you prioritize it?
So the main thing, first of all, is that once, let's say, the term sheet is signed, there's usually a non-disclosure agreement that also gets signed between the two parties, because now one
Mm-hmm.
company is going to now open up the entire, their spectrum of work that they have to the other company. So
Mm-hmm.
once those two things are put into place, signed and closed, then the other thing is for a deal room essentially to be visualized and kept. So that there are companies sometimes that will give physical papers, but most of the times nowadays you do the entire thing within a particular data room. The data room
Mm-hmm.
essentially is where we see that all the requirements are put in. So, in
Okay.
order to facilitate that data room, you kind of come up with a checklist. That checklist,
Mm-hmm.
depending upon the deal structure, you essentially provide each and every aspect that you want to look at. And that's where you make the various categories that I want the labor compliances, I want, let's say, the
Mm-hmm.
approvals, regulatory requirements. If they have got foreign investment, then what are the filings they have done in that? And we essentially earmark them into different categories. Once that
Mm-hmm.
entire due diligence checklist is put and provided,
Mm-hmm.
that is given to the other side, and then they start putting the documents into the data room, which you essentially download, look at. And there are checklists that we come in that shows what stage each document is, and if there are any additional questions that you have with regard to that particular document that you're providing. So sometimes a document will lead to another document, or there could be
Mm-hmm.
a particular clause there that makes you realize that there could be another concern or an issue with a vendor. So these
Mm-hmm.
questions are then asked, any supplementary documents are sought for, and then your second checklist goes on. So it's a very
Mhm,
to and fro process that takes place.
mhm,
So the idea is to see that you cover every dimension that is there with
mhm,
respect to that particular deal. You then see that all the data that is culled out is studied, and you see if there are any follow-on questions. Those follow-on questions essentially also gets what you call pinpointed. Once that is
mhm,
done, the the findings are essentially mapped, and we come
Mhm.
up with like a matrix which is more like a risk matrix that tells
Mhm.
which are the ones that still are what do you call, have not been resolved, and what is the
Mhm.
potential issue with it, and we
Mhm.
take the call whether or not how important it is for the deal to move on. See, at every
Mhm.
stage one has to ensure when we are going through it that the deal should not fall through. But
Mhm.
the only reason why a deal essentially falls through is there are too many red flags. But
Mhm.
otherwise, you're trying to see that you take it through the end of it. So
Mhm.
your risk matrix essentially provides whether or not it's a low risk, medium risk, or a high risk. The high risk and
Mhm.
medium risk needs to definitely get responded back. And then one also then finds out thereafter any solutions that are there, and those are
Mhm.
parked, and thereafter it comes into your documentation.
Mhm.
So this is
Okay.
essentially how that whole process starts. In the
Mhm.
documentation, you then give if any protections are required, any indemnities are
Mhm.
there. You look into aspects of any adjustments that you want to do in your price flow, that the
Mhm.
price that is essentially being given it, and of course the red flags that are there. If there are any deal breakers, that you essentially have to sound it to the client.
Oh, okay. Sounds really interesting. So, when it comes to, during the due diligence while you're conducting the litigation check, what's the process? How does it look like? What kind of, like you already mentioned, like tax being one of the important components that you check into. So, when it comes to litigation case check, what does the day-to-day workflow look like? How complex is it? Because I can imagine that you have to go through so many different jurisdictions, and you have to make sure that each and every single one of them is checked. Because even a small litigation that can be missed can really be a deal breaker down the line as well, right?
True, very true. So if you look at any litigation things, there are different ways we get into it. Okay, so for
Mm-hmm.
the litigation due diligence that we do, we of course ask them to submit whatever other litigation that they are in. So if
Mm-hmm.
essentially they are a little bit tight-lipped about a particular litigation, that's when your antenna goes up also, and we
Yeah.
would keep going back and keep asking
Mm-hmm.
them again and again about that particular aspect. We do
Mm-hmm.
a general search also to see whether or
Mm-hmm.
not the name crops up. You also
Mm-hmm.
will go into the various code databases that are there to see whether or not names related to the companies crop up either as a plaintiff or as a respondent or as an appellant. So when we
Mm-hmm.
do that kind of a whole search processes, and there are now a lot of what do you call AI data litigation database. I think you
Mm-hmm.
guys have one also,
Yeah.
which essentially allows you to do the whole reference check in that. So whichever
Mm-hmm.
ones get thrown up, you essentially ask the Q&As according to that, and then try and cull it
Mm-hmm.
up. Again. Those that they essentially submit, one goes through the plaints and the written statements. There might be sometimes they would have just given the plaint, and then we'll see that there could be an issue or a concern there. We ask for the written statements. We ask if there are any orders passed. There might be any evidence that might again set a particular red flag. You do ask. So the idea, as you see, the whole process is
Mm-hmm.
a review. That review,
Mm-hmm.
when you go through, is when you understand whether or not how healthy that particular company is. And
Mhm,
each thing, it's like peeling an onion layer. You keep
mhm,
peeling it till you get into the whole fulcrum of it, and then you have to chop it up into your documentation. That's as simple
yeah.
as how I can put it, but that's the idea. So you cannot let
Mhm,
go anything that sets your antenna up. You do have
mhm,
to investigate and get it out. There are times that
mhm,
we have used investigative bodies to get back to us also on diligence to see
mhm,
that it is rightly being answered. It depends upon
mhm,
what essentially unfold.
mhm.
So
Okay.
this is
Yeah.
essentially it. So when you look at
Mhm,
So if I were to say that if I did the due diligence of the litigation, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times we also say that it's not 100% accurate. That is
Mm-hmm.
also a case when you're looking at the litigation, because sometimes you will not be able to call out the whole thing. So that is
Mm-hmm.
where again it gets into the documentation. But you essentially see if there's any liabilities or issues with the company. You see
Mm-hmm.
if there are any proceedings against a particular founder or the owner of the company. If there are any
Mm-hmm.
disputes, so if you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at a large what do you call B2C kind of a company, then yes, what kind of consumer disputes are coming? Is it to do with defects and things like that? Those are other
Mm-hmm.
secondary issues that you start culling out so that again
Mm-hmm.
it gets your documentation.
True. So, I mean, based on what we are telling, I think a lot of emotional intelligence and empathy is also needed while talking to the stakeholders as well. Because, like you just mentioned, sometimes they might be a little bit tight-lipped about, providing the litigation history of the company, because they might be worried about, like, okay, what does the actual implication mean for the valuation of that company, right?
Yeah.
And the deal structure. True, true. So, as like you mentioned at Legitquest over here, we are building a product called Level, which you can get like an entire litigation check done for any particular person or an entity across India. As we know, we have the largest legal database in the country, and as you rightly mentioned, the accuracy of it as well, sometimes the name or the address, or like there's going to be like so many different combinations in the court documents, maybe a typing mistake that you just because of a typing mistake you can miss out on a very crucial litigation aspect as well, I would assume.
Correct.
So
Correct.
perfect. So while doing this litigation check, what's the biggest challenge for you, whether it's managing stakeholders, whether it's an incomplete data, some disclosures, or like how would you tackle and prioritize them?
So I think one of the issues is, of course, your data room concern.
Mm-hmm.
What if they don't give you the requisite documentation that you need?
Mm-hmm.
Or, there is a go slow on giving the documents. I think that is one
Mm-hmm.
of the key issues whenever you do the LDD. So it's very important, that the two parties make each other very much aligned to the factor that the sooner the documents are essentially given and all the documents are given, the faster the
Mm-hmm.
transaction also runs. So I think larger companies tend to have that very much in place.
Mm-hmm.
They will not essentially renege on something like that. But yes, if you look at a mid-sized company or a startup, that becomes a very a crucial aspect. If your data room is not complete or it's not
Mm-hmm.
organized properly, then yes, then things like the disclosures that are given are very generalized in nature and they don't give specific responses. That also becomes a slow marker as far as due
Mm-hmm.
diligence is concerned. And the like I've already mentioned, the reluctance
Mm-hmm.
to share information becomes a very key concern also in the
Mm-hmm.
general flow on how you do it. So the main thing here is kind of like a very disciplined way in which one has to
Mm-hmm.
go through. And if you don't get the requisite information, then you have to mark that out. When that
Mm-hmm.
happens, then it's a complete commercial call that is taken between the parties, whether or not they want to proceed. But as a professional, it is very important for you to try and cull as much information as you can, or to,
Mm-hmm.
basically point it to your client to say that, look, this is a very, very key concern as far as, these aspects are concerned. They're missing
Mm-hmm.
data. We've asked these questions, it's gone numerous, because we are deadline oriented. It should
Mm-hmm.
not go back on us as a professional saying that we've not done our back work or we have not asked the right questions. So those
Mm-hmm.
things are very, very important to follow through when you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at a data room that is essentially sitting there and it's incomplete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Makes sense. So, as you rightly say, AI is here. There's no denying it. AI is disrupting the industry, pretty much every single industry out there. When it comes to this legal due diligence, how do you see AI adding a value addition for the due diligence work that you do? And where do you feel that human judgment is absolutely necessary?
So I think the main thing, with what AI essentially does is it helps you find your information. So what
Mm-hmm.
we are doing, which will might take you, a month or so with an AI, if you are using the keywords and you use looking at the right place, it can cull that information out very much faster than any one of us can essentially do
Mm-hmm.
it. Going word by word, and you keep going on and on and on. So once you get your checklist through and you've asked the right
Mm-hmm.
question, the system can essentially generate all that information. But that is where that human intervention comes in, that you
Mm-hmm.
are able to cull out what exactly you're looking for, and you are able to pinpoint what exactly is needed according to that deal structure.
Mm-hmm.
So culling that whole information is, I would say, nothing like using an AI reader for that. But
Mm-hmm.
that interpretation that you require, that actually helps you through that entire process to get into your documentation, that
Mm-hmm.
requires your intervention, and that cannot essentially get done by AI, at least not at this stage. AI is
Mm-hmm.
very good in your data, but AI is not
Mm-hmm.
so good in interpreting that particular data. So I would say
Mm-hmm.
that's when we would need to step in. So it helps making your deal responses much faster because you
Mm-hmm.
use tools. But at the same time, you cannot be lackadaisical on the information that you're getting. Sometimes it could be too much. So you have to look
Mm-hmm.
through and find out the right information.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So we have discussed a lot about legal diligence so far. Can you tell me like what's next once a legal due diligence is done, a litigation check is done? What's next? How does it affect the deal? Like maybe, as you mentioned, if promote the directors of the company are let's say a little bit tight-lipped, and they are not didn't tell you about a particular case, and you found out about it. What's next? How would you tackle it, and how does it affect the deal later on?
So once your due diligence, so actually sometimes the due diligence also gets done as you're entering your next stage. So the term sheet
Mm-hmm.
signing happens, most of the due diligence is done. It depends upon what you found out in your first round, and then
Mm-hmm.
the documentation starts. So always when we start the documentation, by and large, according to the term sheet, it gets converted. The main
Mm-hmm.
thing is what you want to put in your reps and warranties. It's a very integral part of any deal document, and what kind of
Mm-hmm.
indemnity you want from the other side that you are examining. These become a very, very crucial point. So
Mm-hmm.
this kind of work into the documentation then becomes part of that whole due diligence process that comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So that gets converted here. So these red flags that we have, that you're not
Mm-hmm.
getting that information, how we
Mm-hmm.
have to study how crucial it is. And if it is still something like a medium risk, then we cover it with an indemnity. And we see that
Mm-hmm.
you your representation, which might be a little bit broad based. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times you'll see in the documentation, we don't account for having done the due diligence, which means
Mm-hmm.
that we take these despite the due diligence being done. That is
Mm-hmm.
also largely being done because the due diligence, however, you've done it in as effective a manner, you still
Mm-hmm.
have that scope of having missed something out. So therefore,
Mm-hmm.
we ensure that gets covered in the reps, warranties, and the indemnities and liability that we essentially are putting it on the
Mm-hmm.
company we are taking. That's basically how it becomes. So your legal due diligence document helps you to find out the risk points and then
Mm-hmm.
tell the buyer or the purchaser of that particular entity that, look, this is how you're going to cover yourself with what we have found out. And
Mm-hmm.
those that are red flags, which essentially shows like a large dispute that affects the very functioning
Mm-hmm.
of the company, or there is a
Mm-hmm.
financial aspect or a tax liability that's sitting looming large, those could
Mm-hmm.
become potential deal breakers.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that you must have gone through so many various challenges in this, while managing different deals and bringing it to a particular closure as well. So, before, as we can, as I I think we are running out of time. So just to wrap up a bit, before we close, like what is the one practical piece of advice that you would give to companies or the next generation of lawyers to handle due diligence in a much smarter or more efficient way during the deals?
I think it's important that we do get into AI tools. It just makes it
Mm-hmm,
faster and allows you to take on more work, I would
mm-hmm,
say. Very important also to give the heads up, what I said already, that the data room has to be ready,
mm-hmm,
which means that
mm-hmm,
you give the heads up to the person you're going to invest into, that please start getting your documentation, everything getting. And a lot of now, more and more founders are getting savvy on that. Therefore, they,
mm-hmm,
try to see that all these things are essentially kept ready, because they also don't want to slow it down, and that speeds up the whole process. And I think very important also, if I were to talk about any young professional, you need to look at the commercial nature of the transaction. It is not
mm-hmm,
just that you go by the book. And I've
mm-hmm,
seen a lot of times when I'm on the other side, a lot of the due diligence that is done is thorough, but
mm-hmm,
sometimes unnecessary aspects tend to crop up that slows down the deal. So I think a more
mm-hmm,
practical approach and a more commercial approach
mm-hmm,
envisages a more holistic deal and takes it to the end. It's also very important to enter a particular, especially when you are advising your client to make an acquisition, to enter
mm-hmm,
it with the mindset that you must see it through. So a lot of times when we sit on that pedestal, and when you are an acquirer, you tend to be like, okay, I'm going to give the best, especially the youngsters, think I want
mm-hmm,
to give the best legal advice possible. What you need to look at it, the eye on the tiger is actually to see a deal going through. That's what I say.
mm-hmm,
It's important, and it should not go through for very, very sound reasons. It should not be
mm-hmm,
for, by and large, unless it's a very savvy investor, some of them tend to depend on you and what you're
mm-hmm,
advising. So your advice has to be holistic in nature.
mm-hmm,
And I would always say it should be to see how good that deal is for the company. So the commercial
mm-hmm.
understanding of that is very, very important.
Perfect. Sounds really great. I mean, like during our this entire conversation, I believe you have dropped so many tremendous pearl of information that I'm pretty much sure that I'm 100% convinced that our audience is going to find it extremely valuable. And thank you so much once again for joining us for this episode of podcast of for the legal lens. And thank you so much for dropping this
Thank
information
you.
for us.
My
Perfect,
pleasure.
perfect,
My pleasure. It was truly good talking to you, Neha. Thank you so much. And
perfect,
thank you, Legitquest, for putting this together.
perfect. Thank you so much.